And so to kick it off, Henry and all the other candidates, the first question is, according to the city's own assessment, Peterborough will need 484 new units of rent geared to income supportive housing by 2029. In order to meet the needs of everyone in the community, what's your plan to achieve this? And of course, the first answer goes to Henry.
Well, thanks very much, Jim. One of the first things I would do is what I talked about in my Rotary speech last Monday. I believe that the Mayor of Peterborough, working with Sandra Clancy, need to immediately declare a state of emergency when it comes to homelessness. Because it will be 10 to 11 weeks before a new administration is brought into office. During this time, the United Way tells us there's 321 individuals that may not have shelter this winter. We need to declare this emergency so that the municipality of Peterborough can access funds from the Government of Ontario and the Government of Canada to meet this need. I'm also proposing a 4-point plan. Number one, establish Service Peterborough so that developers who are creating new housing, particularly new affordable housing, have their applications dealt with in an expeditious manner. Two, complete the process of establishing our government business enterprise to expeditiously and immediately apply to Canada Housing and Mortgage Corporation for the funding to finance new construction units, with one proviso. We need to get a tax opinion before we set this up, because currently we could face tax exposure of $1 to $2 million, which would take $1 to $2 million out of investments we could make in affordable housing. Number three, use the equity in existing Peterborough Housing Corporation stock to finance new construction. And to build out our housing portfolio, we need to look at tiny homes, boxable homes, container homes as part of our long-term solution.
In 2021, the Overflow Shelter moved to its current location on Wolfe Street and extended its hours to 24/7. When the provincial funding for this service expansion expired, City Council stepped in and committed municipal money to keep the shelter open until March 31st of the next year. But beyond that, the future of the shelter is uncertain. City Council will likely debate whether to continue funding the shelter during its budget deliberations this coming January. About 28 people were staying in the Overflow Shelter per night at the beginning of this year. As mayor, would you support the continuation of municipal funding for 24-hour services at the Overflow Shelter beyond March 31st? Why or why not? And if not, what alternatives do you propose to keep people warm and safe in the potential absence of a shelter?
I am committed to ensuring that our community has sufficient shelter beds to house our homeless population. I will collaborate with the new council to determine the best manner to achieve this objective. We need to work on longer-term housing solutions, but we need to immediate action to save lives, especially this winter. It is an emergency situation. Currently, the community has tasked to come up with a plan. We have our health unit, Forecast, CMHC, the United Way, One City, who are all at the table cobbling resources together. Other organizations are working to provide support, but there's one missing factor. The city needs to support this important effort. I will never allow bureaucratic barriers to stand in the way of taking care of those who need it most in our community today.
Marcus, thanks, Marcus. Thanks, Jeff, for that. Jeff was the last answer to the last question. Thanks, Marcus, and thanks to my colleague Naomi. The third question is as follows. In 2019, City Council responded to the Victoria Park Tent City encampment by enacting a new bylaw prohibiting camping in public parks. Since then, the bylaw has forced people who are living in parks to repeatedly pack up their belongings and vacate premises under threat of police action. Often, the people being kicked out of the park say they had nowhere else to go. However, the city's bylaw does include a provision that allows municipal leaders to designate particular parks as premises or as permissible campsites when they judge the shelter capacity to be insufficient. As mayor, would you support the continued eviction of people experiencing homelessness from city parks? Alternatively, would you support the use of the bylaw to allow camping in select parks? Why? Why not?
Thank you very much. Housing people in tents in city parks is not a viable medium or long-term solution to homelessness in our community. There's a parks bylaw that prevents tenting. Of course, we don't want people living in tents, but without viable solutions, they have nowhere else to go. There is a clause that would allow tenting in the case that shelters reach capacity. Community organizations agree that this bylaw is harmful and puts our most vulnerable neighbors at greater risk. As a community, we have a responsibility to treat everyone with respect and to address their needs. The goal should not be to evict people, but to house people. The responsibility for this rests with the mayor, council, and our broader community. We need to ensure that we provide services that people need, services that assist with addiction, mental health, food insecurity, and permanent supportive housing. We need to remember that people living in tents have important concerns that must be addressed. When providing shelter space, things like ensuring their belongings will be safe, and they're able to maintain their relationships, and they can also care for their pets.
Question 4, there's 2 more to go. In Peterborough, we know that many individuals experiencing homelessness are unable to access shelter or choose not to access shelter. Some don't access shelter because they own a pet. Others don't access shelter because they want to stay with their significant other. Still more do not access shelters because of their drug use. And lastly, many people are simply not allowed to step foot inside our shelters. Over the first year of the COVID-19 pandemic, the number of service restrictions banning people from municipally funded shelters increased by more than 400%. How will you ensure Peterborough provides low-barrier shelter service and that everyone who experiences homelessness in Peterborough has immediate access to a shelter bed the very first night they seek it?
I've committed to collaborating with council, community partners, and the senior levels of government to create a low-barrier shelter in our community. We're a G7 country. There's no citizen that should ever die being exposed to the weather elements. As I said earlier, we need to treat people with respect and address their social, economic, and health needs. Shelters need to be transitory. New initiatives to create affordable housing and assisted housing must accompany any plan to expand our shelter system. I recognize that there can be issues with particular individuals. However, a goal must be to find them the professional help and care they need and not to put them on the street. There are lots of longer-term solutions to the housing crisis. But for those who are the most marginalized, we need 24/7 supportive care so that they can remain housed and get the supports they need. We need more supportive and more transitional homes. A key thing the city could do is expedite planning and permitting and ensuring housing is affordable and integrated into all new builds. As far as the drug poisoning crisis, there are a lot of new harm reduction initiatives that are working. The CDS site is a great example of a collaborative project that is saving lives and also helping to make our downtown safer for everyone. We also need to get 15 more officers to improve our police intelligence so we can track down those drug dealers.
And this is the last question for this round, and then we're going to turn it over to you and to the audience online. And the 5th question for our candidates is as follows. The mayor helps to set the tone for city council, and city council helps to set the tone for the rest of our community. For example, in recent years, city council members have contributed to a spreading narrative that people experiencing homelessness in Peterborough are not really from this city and so should not receive our help. You're running to be a leader in this community. what kind of tone would you try to set for our community's discussions around homelessness? And what public narrative shifts would you push for?
Thanks, Jim. Very simple. We have a fundamental responsibility to treat all people with respect and dignity. Peterborough at its core is a generous and caring community. I've seen this throughout my public career. I intend to harness the fundamental goodness of our residents and channel this to assist those in need. I intend to be a mayor for all members of our community, just not parts of our community. If I have the privilege of becoming mayor on October 24th, within 30 days of being sworn in, I will ask for a report providing of all the data and options to address homelessness. Action is needed now. And secondly, I will make sure that every portfolio chair member of this council has a public mandate letter. And at any given time, any member of the public can access those mandate letters to make sure that those chairs are achieving the objectives they need to achieve to make sure that Peterborough is a better community for us all.
It appears in our community that we are seeing an increase in mental health, addictions, crime, litter, and more. Studies tell us that when inequality increases in a community, this tends to be the result. We tend to see rises in these other phenomena. This increase in inequality is affecting everyone, including all residents in the neighborhoods more or most affected by the effects of these rising or growing inequalities. How will you work to create a community where everyone can feel supported, cared for, and safe?
Peterborough has an incredible talent of people. I think of Donna Rogers at Forecast, Mark Graham at CMHC, people at PRHC, people at our health unit. But one of the things that we're missing in Peterborough, in the spring of this year, the community of Sault Ste. Marie got $18 million to develop 20 treatment beds. Peterborough is one of the few communities in Ontario of our size that does not have treatment beds. We need to work with Mr. Smith as quickly as possible to bring those treatment beds, perhaps to the Trinity Church Center, which we're in the process of developing. That is fundamental. As many medical people in Peterborough have told me, the one way to beat addiction is to get the person off the substance, and once you do that, you have them on the path to recovery through numerous sets. But the other thing is, one of the things we got to do, in a previous life I used to get briefings. In Ontario today, illicit drug trade is a serious problem.
I just wanted to know if any of you folks are landlords and how many units you own.
In 1990, when my mother died, I purchased from my older brother, my younger brother, my family home in the south end of Peterborough, the corner of Montrose and McKellar. Since then, my son Braden and 3 other buddies are living in my family home, and they pay Karen and I rent.
As head of council, how will you address stigma and misinformation about drug use and homelessness spread by many fellow council members?
The best way you can do it is call it out when it happens. Jagmeet Singh's a friend of mine. I served with him in the Ontario legislature. When he came to Peterborough, the way he was treated was abysmal, appalling. That should never happen to anybody. I served with the Premier of the province of Ontario who was gay, and the first woman Premier of the province of Ontario. Let me tell you a story. One day, she came into cabinet and I was there early. Premier Wynne showed me her iPhone. It was the most vile, misogynistic, hateful diatribe that I ever heard in my life. I would never repeat what was on that iPhone. So ladies and gentlemen, every elected politician, whether it's at the municipal level, the provincial level, the federal level, has to call these people out each and every day and correct the facts and provide truthful information to the public every day.
People that are like sitting on the streets and they'd rather go to jail because it's like they get fed, but they just sit there. You can work in jail, but they just give you a banana. So you make no fucking money. So when you get out, when you get out of jail, you have no money, can't get a house, can't do nothing. So you got these jails, you can put a rehab in the jails. You got no programs, you got AA. They got jobs in jails. You build jumpers or blankets. That's the jobs.
So
Okay, your jails are falling apart. People will commit crimes to go to jail because they feel safer, because the overflow is like a outside jail. But there's jobs in jails, and you make just a banana or food, sometimes nothing. So you guys could put a rehab in the jail. Saves a lot of money. I don't know. I think that would be a good solution. Like, not everybody's a criminal or murderer, you know? So some people are just desperate, you know? They don't want to kill themselves, so they just break a window or push no.
So I'm going to try to restate, and so you tell me what I'm getting wrong. So people sometimes end up actually doing small crimes to get a spot in jail because it's the safest, best place to sleep some nights. And your proposal is that instead we should
There's no supports in jails. There's just
not support the jails. So we
no,
want
there's no supports in the jails.
and
No
then
programs,
okay,
no nothing.
Thank you. So then what happens are people go into jails and then they come back out with empty pockets and
Yeah. They got jobs in jails. You can work in jails. They need, like, so you make funding. No, I'm saying that you could pay them money so then they get out, they can,
Right.
and you could put a rehab in the jail because
Right.
they're sitting there all fucking day. Excuse me.
Okay. So the proposal is that instead of having people come out of jail poor, struggling, addicted to substances that have not been, people haven't received supports they're looking for in jail, we want to actually create opportunities for people to safely come out of jails with jobs and other kinds of services that they may choose to use at that time.
Yeah, because when you go to jail, you become a worse criminal, and like it's not. I don't know. I just think that there's your rehabs and jails. I don't.
So supports in jail. Yes, so thank you. So supports in jail. What do you think about this idea? Better transitions from jail. There are a lot of people, I can attest that the research we did this summer, many people are coming sort of in a cycle between jail and the streets in our community. What will you do to address that cycle?
In my volunteer activity, I serve with Employment Planning and Counseling in Peterborough. I currently am the chair of that board. Karen Wilson and her team at EPC really do a terrific job. We work very closely with the Elizabeth Fry Society and the John Howard Society, people that have moved out of the Ontario and federal correction system in this province obviously have barriers to employment. EPC does a real terrific job in finding ways to break down those barriers, partner with employers in this community, and put individuals on a real positive career path and supporting them at EPC every step of the way.
We've never asked, what's your name?
I'm Melissa.
Hi, welcome, and thanks for being here. Thanks for being here. Why don't you ask your question? I'll let people know the order.
Mr. Lumsden, I'd just like you to know that if you ever suffer from substance abuse, we will offer you the compassion that you deny us. On to my question. As a city that has 3 reserves bordering it and has a large Indigenous urban population, I'd like to know what you as a mayor would specifically do to address Indigenous people in the homelessness crisis.
During my 15 years that I had the great privilege of being the member of provincial parliament for Peterborough, I spent a year as the parliamentary assistant to the Minister of Aboriginal Affairs in the province of Ontario. It was through that process that I learned firsthand about the tragic legacy of residential schools in the province of Ontario. I visited Saskatchewan, Apawapiskat, Sandy Lake, those communities that are all too frequent in our news media cycle. But I count Keith Knott at Curve Lake and Laurie Carr at Hiawatha as personal friends of mine. In fact, when I launched my campaign for mayor, it was a great privilege for me to have Laurie Carr there to read the land declaration. But one of the things I can commit to tonight, that when we're dealing with issues like homelessness, I will make sure that those two individuals are consulted to make sure that we have culturally
Thank you,
sensitive
Jeff.
responses.
Thanks very much, Jeff. How will the candidates ensure that the voices of unhoused folks in our community are heard, respected, validated, and most importantly, I editorialized there, and most importantly, included in all processes with respects to them?
Thanks very much, Jim. One of the things on my platform, I have a section that is called Effective Government to Improve Transparency and Decision-Making. I've suggested that we have 5 citizens committee, and one of them, of course, is on housing and homelessness. You know, there's a long time ago when I got into public life, I was given advice that goes like this: you should always remind yourself you know what you don't know, and you bring the best people around you with lived experience to give you the kind of advice to come up with positive solutions. As the former agriculture minister of the province of Ontario, I used to find out solutions when I went into a farmer's field, looking at fields of soybean and corn, and find out his experience to give me advice on formulating public policy. That is the way to approach many of these issues in our community today. Bring people in, respect their advice, get the job done.
What do you think about rent control? Do you have any jurisdiction of control over rent control policies in this city? That's pretty much it. What would you do? What are your thoughts on rent control?
So thank you so much.
Rent controls is the sure jurisdiction of the province of Ontario. They set rent controls each and every year. They have a formula in place done by the Ministry of Housing and Municipal Affairs and the Finance Ministry of the province of Ontario. I was part of a government that raised the minimum wage in the province of Ontario. I was also part of a government, and I take some pride in, that we brought in the basic income pilots in 3 communities across the province of Ontario. And we were very convinced that once the data was produced from those 3 pilots in Lindsay, Hamilton, and Thunder Bay, that would have provided the basis for a basic income in the province of Ontario, which would have helped our homeless people, would have helped low-income people, and would have been a real backstop for general prosperity in this province.